And we are live.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'd like to call to order the February 5th, 2024 meeting of the Charleston County Board of Trustees, the special meeting. I'll now determine if we have a quorum. Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. It has been confirmed that we have a quorum. I'll officially call this meeting to order. I want to remind everyone that our discussion pursuant to board policy BE and the FOIA laws should be focused on the matters specified on the post agenda for this special called meeting. Before we move on to the adoption of the agenda, I understand that Dr. Temple has requested to comment. Dr. Temple, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Before we go into executive session tonight, I need to have some clarification for outcomes of this meeting. We've been in previous executive sessions expecting information, and then we return to open session with motions that don't quite coordinate with the agenda. Historically, we've been dealing with what the May 18th motion that restricted a superintendent's decision-making powers according to policy. I, for one, thought it was temporary until we hired a full superintendent. There was a failed attempt on July 17th to rescind this motion, and several times the motion was used to deny Dr. Gallian's request. Yet tonight we're called into a special meeting to rescind the motion when we haven't completed the hiring process or issued a contract for a new superintendent. So I have these questions. What is the needed action tonight that when we do not have a superintendent?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a question before you answer that.
Well, and I'll have to, Mr. Johnson attending this. I think these are all going to be debated. It's my understanding that Dr. Temple wanted to make a statement, and I think these will all be clarified once we get into executive session. I mean, I think the agenda was pretty clear. The history of the agenda was pretty clear, and the recommended action as posted on the agenda. So I think we're going outside of what we should go.
Well, let me go inside with these questions. First of all, who is the legal counsel for this contractual matter?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Once again, Dr. Temple, we're only here to talk about the resolution. And I would like to discuss this in executive session.
Well, my second question is that on the agenda, it says executive session items. So with the S on item, it sounds like we could have more than one item.
Not for FOIA.
I think we just need to get into executive session and discuss this, Ms. Temple. And I think all your answers will be resolved. And if they aren't, then once we come out of executive session, you can express them.
Thank you.
A point of clarification.
You have the floor, Ms. Roberson.
Thank you. I think Dr. Temple is trying to not discuss the issue, but to find out why we are going into executive session to discuss something that's already been discussed in public. So there's nothing confidential about the May 18th vote. I think that's what she's asking.
Mr. Chairman, I asked for
Hold on, Miss Watley, please.
I asked for the floor after Dr. Temple.
Okay, Ms. Roberson has taken the floor and asked her question or made a statement. Ms. Watley, would you like the floor?
Yes, sir. Before we adopt the agenda, I would like to move that we actually hold this in open session versus executive session, especially since this issue has been one of such controversy. I feel that the public deserves to be able to hear what all we have to say and our reasonings for why this action is being brought up now. And it also is a requirement by law to hold this session in executive session. And I know a number of us made a commitment when we answered a lot of questions for the media when we were campaigning. And one of the things that we campaigned on was not holding executive session unless the law required it to be an executive session. With that said, I'd like to adopt the agenda with an amended agenda. Instead of it being an executive session, have it an open session.
I second that.
I don't think we can take any votes till we call the meeting to order.
I haven't called the meeting to order. These were solely for statements. And I agree with Ms. McKinney. In response to some of the clarifications, the last time we discussed this resolution was in an executive session. It was passed in an executive session. It is a personnel matter and a legal issue, and that's why it must be discussed in session. But with all that, are there any further statements to make before I call the meeting to order?
Mr. Karbowski, I don't recall discussing, we made this motion in executive session. But then we came out and discussed it May 18th in public. And then July 17th, we discussed it in public. So it was removed from executive session on July 17th and brought to the public, just as Ms. Watley said. I think there's nothing legal about the May 18th vote that we need legal advice on.
The May 18th directive is not in and of itself something the law requires to be discussed in executive session.
It was discussed in executive session because it is a legal matter of a pending contract discussion.
I
Mr.
have no
Karbowski,
issue
Which
with
needs to be done
discussing-
in executive session.
I have no issue with contractual matters in executive session, but the May 18th directive, I believe that discussion needs to be held in public, especially since it's been so publicly controversial.
What I'd like to do is to, now if we're finished with our statements, to go ahead and
Mr.
officially-
Karbowski, could you let Mr. I'm sorry, please have him recognized. Can Mr. Johnson speak to what does this have to do with legal advice? Because I don't see where this has anything to do with the contractual matter. We've not issued a contract to anyone yet. So why are we discussing anything related to a contract? The May 18th vote was separate from a contract.
Ms. Roberson, everything that we're discussing right now is regarding the agenda. So what I would like to do is officially call the meeting to order so that we can discuss the agenda. So I officially call this meeting to order. The time is 6:41. Before we move on to an adoption of the agenda, I understand there is some discussion about amending the agenda. Do I have anyone who would like to make an amendment?
I formally request to amend the agenda before we adopt it to have public discussion regarding the May 18th directive before we vote on it.
I second it.
Second.
Okay, a motion has been made and it has been seconded. It is now open for discussion. Who would like to first discuss it? Or anybody like to be recognized to discuss it?
As long as what is discussed does not disclose confidential matters that are covered in executive session.
I agree. I think we all are aware of that, of the ethical responsibilities.
And then perhaps we should discuss the private matters first and then have this discussion after the private matters.
Right now, there's a motion to amend the agenda on the table. There is
I would
So-
suggest we amend it to include item 6B as adjourning.
I'll second that.
Can you repeat that, Ms. McKinney?
Certainly. 6A is upcoming meetings. I would like to amend it with 6B being adjournment.
Don't we have to deal with the pending motion that's been seconded first?
Yes, we have not voted and we haven't had any discussions. So we will deal with the first motion first. And I am opening the floor for discussion on the first motion, which is Ms. Watley's motion. And I think, Mr. Johnson, you've been a party to the discussion that has been entering into, and there's been a request for a legal opinion.
Well, there are, I suppose, ongoing contractual negotiations. By the way, there was a question earlier about what lawyer was handling those negotiations. Those negotiations are being handled by a counsel, an attorney named Sherry Blackburn. They are not being handled by myself, but as a general matter, the school district administration has engaged outside counsel, if you will, to handle negotiations and contractual issues with a pending superintendent, so to speak, and that is who is handling these negotiations. So the issue that is before you, this is relative to the motion that's on the floor, can be discussed or could be discussed in executive session to the extent that that issue is included in contractual negotiations. The FOIA does allow for executive session discussion of contractual negotiations, but it's not required to be discussed in executive session. And if the board voted to discuss it in open session, the board could do that. There is no lawful requirement that it be done in executive session, but the board could vote to do it in executive session. The policy itself is not an executive session issue. The May 18th policy itself, what could be and is what could be discussed in executive session, if you choose to do it, would be the contractual negotiations issue, not the May 18 policy itself.
Okay.
Which is what I was stating. We can separate the two.
The floor recognizes Ms. Temple.
Yeah, that's why I had these questions about, what we were going into executive session for. If we're to just rescind this motion for tonight, then it seems to me that we could do that openly. So I have questions on what were we going to discuss about, a contract? Were we going to see a written proposal for a 3-year employment contract for the new superintendent? Were we going to look at an new organizational chart? Were we going to give a rationale for why we need to rescind the May 18th motion? I just have a lot of questions because I'm very skeptical about us going into executive session without knowing what could be some possible outcome, especially since we have executive session items on the agenda and contractual matter. I didn't think we were doing a contractual matter.
Yeah.
I thought we were just working on rescinding the May 18th motion.
If I may,
The floor recognizes Ms. Watley.
thank you. The reason why I made the motion to have this discussion in public regarding the May 18th directive, is because we're hearing from members of the public, because it has been a focal point of a lot of controversy. And quite frankly, we have a precedent here where we had acting superintendent, Mr. Kennedy, who was attempting to appoint people before he left just prior to our hiring another superintendent with that knowledge.
Ms. Watley, if I could just step in, it just sounds like we're getting into the debate issue. I think our attorney has given us a valid opinion as to whether this can be held in public or in executive session. I think what we should do is we should move on and vote onto the agenda.
I mean, if I may, you completely interrupted my whole stream of thought.
But I'm just saying, I'm making
motion.
an executive decision. I think we need to move on and just vote on the motion. And there is a motion.
Can I speak my hand? I don't know how you're going to recognize that. I raised my hand.
I'm sorry, Ms. Roberson. I was
right in
I
the
was letting
middle
Ms.
of
Watley finish her speech,
the
and I'll get back.
floor.
Yeah, I'll give it back to Ms. Watley to finish it up.
Yeah,
I'm just,
thank you. That was very rude. The whole now please allow me to regather my thoughts. The May 18th directive, it has been a point of great controversy. We have a precedent here where we had an acting superintendent who we held accountable to operating with this directive until we hired another superintendent. And after that hire, we still held that directive in place with a 100-day plan, at which time we expected, before we lifted the directive, an organizational chart and a plan. We wanted to know what the plan was for the district after his 100 days of listening and learning. But now we're wanting to lift this directive before we even have a signed contract. And I just don't think this has a good look. I don't think this has a good look, and it definitely doesn't have a good feel. With that, I'll concede to Ms. Roberson.
Ms. Roberson?
In the sake of time, I just would say I agree with what Ms. Watley said, and I won't repeat it. I agree with what she said. But then my second point is to Mr. Johnson. When we look at the agenda, contractual negotiation is not written on the agenda. It said legal advice for contractual whatever, rescindment of May 18 vote. So it's like a combination. So if you wanted to talk to us about contract negotiation, that should have been a separate line item. Right. And then the second line item should have been the May 18th vote. I don't think that those two go hand in hand. We've not even seen a draft of the contract. So it's like we're jumping in the middle of, this. So I think we need to stick to the May 18th vote. And then maybe on the COW agenda or the board agenda, we can do the contract negotiations. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I would like to place the motion forward for vote to amend the agenda to include public discussion before voting on the agenda item. Motion was made by Ms. Watley, seconded by Carol Temple. Is there a second? Oh, there is a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I would ask everybody to cast their votes. Did I hear that Board Docs was working or not?
It is.
Working.
Huh.
Was working for me.
It looks like Dr. Temple's the only one who's voted. Do y'all want to do a voice vote? Would that be beneficial?
I think for time, I think we're gonna have to do it because mine's not working.
Yeah, I don't have a box to vote either.
Me either.
Okay, so
I don't have it either.
We'll call the vote. Ms. Watley?
Yay.
Ms. Roberson?
Okay, we're voting, but are we voting not to go into executive session or just
We're voting to change the agenda.
To have the May 18th directive discussion in person, in public.
Public.
But we are still going into executive session to discuss the contract negotiation? I'm just confused.
The motion on the floor is to adopt the agenda with the amended motion to include public discussion before voting on the agenda item. And I think the public, I would ask that we amend the wording to the public discussion regarding the May 18th resolution.
Yeah, I'm thinking we're here tonight to talk about the May 18th decision and the rescission of it. That's what's on the agenda. All those other words are superfluous.
But if you read
Keith, I will accept your friendly amendment to my friendly amendment.
and if you read the history of the background, you will see why the resolution came up at this time.
Okay, maybe I'm still confused. Are we still going into executive session to discuss a contract?
We may not have to. We may or may not have to. Our first discussion.
Right now, we are voting to adopt the agenda with the May 18th directive to be discussed in public versus executive session. That's correct. That's all that we're taking a vote on right now.
That's correct.
Okay.
Once we vote on this, then we can discuss your other concern.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm not in board docs, so I vote yes.
I really can't see who else is on.
We'll just call us by name.
Yeah, Miss Trudy, could you call by name? Because I can't see who's on. Or
Yes, sir. Ms. McKinney,
No.
Mr. Kelly,
No.
no. Mr. Grabowski,
no.
excuse me, your voice broke up.
No.
Okay, Mr. Calhoun's on. Is Miss Bailey on?
Yes, no. I'm on, but no.
And Dr. Temple?
Yes.
Okay, we've got,
The
motion fails.
The motion fails. On to agenda, the second agenda item, that is to amend the agenda to include as item 6B, adjournment of the meeting. Do I have a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? This is just so we can go home, okay? It's an administrative. It was just something that was left off the agenda. Hearing none, I'd like to put the motion to amend the agenda up for vote. Ms. McKinney,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Yay.
Mr. Kelly,
Yay.
Ms. Roberson,
Yes.
Dr. Temple.
Yes.
I'll vote yay. Am I missing anybody? I'm sorry.
Yep, me.
Watley.
Ms. Watley,
Yay.
and the motion passes. So we will now, the agenda is amended to add 6B, and we will now proceed to vote on the adoption of the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I will move the agenda forward for vote on approval. Ms. McKinney,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Ms. Watley,
Aye.
Dr. Temple,
No.
Ms. Roberson.
No.
I'll vote yay. Am I missing somebody?
Ed
Mr.
votes
Kelly?
yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
And the motion passes and the agenda is approved as amended. Our next order of business is to convene into an executive session to receive legal advice concerning a contractual matter. The specific issue at hand is the rescindment of the May 18th, 2023 motion.
So moved.
Our legal counsel, Mr. Johnson, will be joining us for this session. I heard a motion by Mr. Kelly. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I will move the motion to move into executive session to vote. All in favor, vote aye. Ms. McKinney,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Ms. Watley,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Dr. Temple,
No.
Ms. Roberson.
No.
I'll vote in favor. Aye. And we are now in executive session. I'd ask that all non-members, yes, kindly exit the platform.
Are we in open session now?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Keith, you're on mute. Keith, you're on mute.
On computer. Thank you. Thank you, Leah. I was looking at the wrong computer.
You're welcome.
Is everybody on? Miss Bailey, can you hear us? You're on mute.
Yes.
Excellent. Miss McKinney?
Everybody is on mute.
Everybody's on, okay.
Mm.
I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the executive session and reconvene into the public meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays? Hearing none, ladies and gentlemen, we have now reconvened into public session and we will discuss the matter concerning the rescindment of the May 18th, 2023 motion. Before us, I would like to make a motion to immediately rescind the May 18th, 2023 board motion that restricts the Charleston County's district superintendent changes to the district's organizational chart without board approval and to restore the superintendent's authority under board policy. Do I have a second?
Second.
I will open the floor for discussion.
I'll start.
Dr. Temple.
No, that was actually me.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead, Lee.
Thank you. We have a precedent here, and I don't think that it's prudent to take this action. I believe fair is fair and that everybody should be treated the same. We've had now 2 superintendents operating under this directive. And the last one, we specifically stated that we wouldn't rescind it until after we had seen an organizational chart. Policy says that we should, before we take any action, have time to thoughtfully consider the action that we're going to take. We've heard from public, we've heard from a member of the community who's also featured her opinion in the paper, citing state law as well as board policy and action that was taken by the previous board. I have repeatedly asked that we not have this special call meeting today. I've been away at a conference. I haven't had time to look at any of the relevant materials. I haven't had time to read over the board policy or look back at the previous board's actions to thoughtfully consider the very intelligent concerns that have been expressed. So, and all of that aside, I think about the public image. I think about how the things that the public has said over the last several months regarding this directive. I think about how it's going to look if we rescind this directive this way. It does not have a good look, as I stated earlier. It definitely does not have a good feel. And I wouldn't want any member of the public to think that I was okay with taking this action because of what's on the table here in terms of what we discussed in executive session. I just morally, I don't feel that this is the right thing to do right now. So
Thank you.
I can't support this action.
Thank you. Dr. Temple.
Yes. As someone who initially supported this amendment and then worked to rescind it, because I really don't believe that we should be micromanaging the superintendent, but we should be following policy. However, in the interest of fairness and consistent practice, since we do not have a superintendent contract in place and we don't have a proposal for organizational chart changes, I think it's best that we wait until we have both of these items. I can't support rescinding this motion at this time.
Can I speak?
Ms. Roberson.
Thank you. I agree with Trustee Waters and Trustee Temple. As a supporter and someone that brought this motion forward on July 17th to rescind it, I cannot support it now because it is just not the right thing to do because of everything that this board has set in place. We have to hold everyone to the same standards, and this will not be the proper thing to do. I also want to let the public know that me personally, Trustee Darlene Dunmire Roberson, do not believe that we received legal advice in executive session. We could have discussed everything in public for that 5 minutes that we were in executive session. I look forward to whoever is representing the district to bring forth a full contract for the acting superintendent. I look forward to reviewing that contract and making an informed decision when that contract is presented to us as a board.
Mr. Kelly, do you have anything to discuss?
Yeah, I do. I just want to say thank you to Mr. Johnson for the details of the contract that we discussed in executive session. That was very helpful. Grateful for that information. Secondarily, I absolutely support this motion. The previous two superintendents we had, I didn't have the full faith and confidence in, and I want to do everything I can to support the furtherance of a contract with Ms. Huggins. We've heard from state legislatures, from the community, from teachers, principals, everybody to say that this is the right choice. And so it is absolutely the right choice to help move forward these contract negotiations to ensure that there is stability for the children in our district, because that is ultimately why we are all here tonight.
Thank you for your input. Ms. Bailey.
I ditto what Mr. Kelly said, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your input in executive session. I think it's time for us to move forward and move on and give our support to the new superintendent, Ms. Huggins, in whatever means necessary. So thank you.
Thank you for your input. Ms. Kenny, do you have anything to say?
Yes, absolutely. Quickly, Mr. Johnson, thank you for your guidance, your wisdom, your discernment, and your comment to us. Most of the board has been asking for this recension for months on end. I think it's time we make the recension. We have had 3 totally different scenarios with Mr. Kennedy, Dr. Galligan, and now with Ms. Huggins. It is time for the recension to pass for our district to go forward and concentrate on the classrooms.
Thank you for your input. And I guess I got the last, we'll have the last word. Ms. Huggins has been acting as acting superintendent since September 28th. Under the resolution, she has brought forth a hiring of a procurement officer. She's brought forth the hiring of Ms. Simmons as academic officer, and she's brought forth the hiring of a new CFO, all within lines of the resolution without any problems. So it's been quite some time as acting superintendent. I think that we need to remove this so that we can move on, that we can, I had the opportunity to talk with her last week about ideas that will we need to get in place so that we can, to tackle this thing that's in front of us, which is the budget. And it's critical for us to move forward with it. So I think there's been ample time. I've heard it said that there have been, 3 different separations. I'm just focusing on Mrs. Huggins' actions, what has gone forth, how the resolution has been put in place, and I think it's time for it to go. So I support it. With that being said, I'd like to cut off the discussion and move forward and proceed to vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 I think I'm going to call a roll call on this one. Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. McKinney,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Ms. Roberson,
No.
Ms. Temple,
No.
Ms. Watley,
Nay.
and I will vote aye. The eye has it, the motion passes. I will now entertain, the upcoming meetings. February 5th was today. That's done. Tomorrow is the audit and finance meeting. I highly recommend that anybody that can attend this meeting attend. It'll make the 2-hour workshop at the Committee of the Whole on September 12th much easier on 2024. And then we have our February 26th, 2024 meeting. With that, I'd like to move on to item 6B, and that I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? All in favor?
Second.
Say
Aye.
aye. All those against say nay. The motion passes and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.